Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Betsy Moore. I am the Director of Programs at the Jewish Women's Archive. I want to start by thanking our amazing hosts, the organizers of the Boston Jewish Film Festival and the MFA, especially Joey Katz, Susan Adler, Nicole Clark, and the entire staff that makes this happen. I am honored to be here with Toby Perl Freilich, the director of this marvelous film. I want to just start by asking, how did you come to know about Mierle's work?
You saw the Queens Museum exhibit was featured at the end, and I went on the last day of the exhibit because people were there was a real buzz about this show. And people were saying, you have to see it, you have to see it. So I went to see it, and I was kind of stunned. I guess I'd always wanted to make a film about an artist, but it's hard to find the right subject. And I thought that I thought she had kind of conceptual depth, creative breadth. She was a very charismatic figure. She was still alive. And there was a lot of archival material which would help to bring her story to life, which you don't always have. So in some ways, the film was also an act of conservation. Her work would have, all the video stuff was just sitting there degrading, and I was able to digitize a lot of it. So that was a sort of collateral benefit.
An act of maintenance.
Yeah, exactly, an act of maintenance.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning. Yeah.
What surprised you most as you made this film?
I was surprised at how hard it was to raise funds for it. But aside from that, it wasn't that it was surprising. I think what delighted me is that I kept finding more and more as I got into the subject. I think also, this was a particularly fertile period. It was a moment of deep shifts in the art world, and people didn't understand them necessarily. A lot of the work, especially performance work, left people cold. It wasn't really accessible. They didn't understand the creative process behind it. And so I was eager to kind of peel back the layers of that creative process of an artist. And the more I did, the more depth it had. The more layers I peeled, the more layers there were.
I was so struck by how many ways she challenged binaries, whether those binaries were creation versus maintenance, making, discarding, permanence and impermanence. And one that I thought was interesting was private and public, and the relationship of that to art. I kept thinking about the difference between declaring that one's housework is art and doing it unseen. How does one take something that happens in isolation and turn it into art? Versus what she did with the sanitation workers, where she did this project, she was in community, she was in an organized system, and the difference in visibility of that. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the differences between, or I guess how she thought about the audience and the role of art.
So I think, first of all, she questioned the very nature of what is art, who's an artist, where does art get seen? But I think it's the job of every artist to take the invisible and make it visible. I mean, that's what, I was just, when the film was going on, I saw the Rachel Royce exhibit here, which is just beautiful. And there you are hunting for the insects, among the leaves of the beautiful flowers, and that's what every artist does. And Mierle was, like any artist, was taking the invisible, whether it was a woman's housework in the home or the sanitation workers who were not seen. But I'm glad you said public-private, because this is very much a portrait of a public artist. And there aren't very many artists who have dedicated their lives to public art. There are a few, like Mel Chin, there's Mierle, there are others. But, you know, she really is not wealthy. She did not make money. And there were other artists who started out doing public art and just couldn't make it, and they had to leave and sort of join the market. So I wanted that, and you know, she started a program. She was the inspiration for a program that's now in place in New York City called PAIRS, Public Artists in Residence, and they have public artists in many different city agencies now, because her notion was that artists think differently. They have a different brain. They approach problem solving in a way that, you know, lawyers don't, or whatever, bureaucrats don't. And so she had a real vision for what her work, you know, how far her work would go.
I really appreciate that point, and I really appreciated how you brought in the finances of it, the financial aspect of her art making towards the end of the film, because it was something I had been wondering about. How do you do this work as an unpaid?
Well, right, and she was married, and so she had some leg of stability. I mean, that's important to emphasize. Most artists in the generation immediately preceding her, most women artists, did not have children. I mean, they just had to make a decision whether it was going to be their art or it was going to be a family. I mean, artists like Lee Krasner and Elaine de Kooning and, you know, Joan Mitchell, none of them had kids. And she, I mean, part of it was her religious background and her religious practice, knew she wanted a family, but somehow she, you know, she found a partner who helped her. And she also wrote grants. I mean, she got grant money she did raise money to do her work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the important role that grant making played in that, given that she didn't have any other source of income. And you mentioned her religious background. I was very tantalized by some of the glimpses of her more explicitly Jewish art, like the mikveh piece. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how she thought about how her Judaism infused her art that was not as obviously or explicitly Jewish.
Well, first of all, I think you saw, I mean, what she said. I mean, the underlying principle for her work in terms of her Jewish belief is that we're all created in God's image, and therefore we're all equal. And so the fact that the sanitation workers were not Jewish she could have cared, that didn't affect her. They were people. They were created in God's image, and she believes in, you know, granting dignity to every human creature. And for me, I mean, I grew up in an Orthodox home, and I was so happy to be able to do a film about an artist whose work was values-based and not ritual object, or, you know, it wasn't iconographically Jewish, but it sort of drew on a well of Jewish belief, and that was very deep. And that was definitely a major pull for me to want to make this film. But I should say also, like, in terms of the work you asked about, she embraces her Orthodox culture very deeply in Orthodox practice. She's religious, like the real deal. But she pokes at it. She pokes at the patriarchy. She pokes at sometimes the racism of it. She doesn't sort of give it a pass at all. So.
No, and I wonder, do you think that that's another binary that she troubled? The binary between religious and conformity and non-religious and iconoclastic?
I think, you know, you don't find, as she says, you don't have very many contemporary artists who are religious. And it doesn't have to be Jewish. I mean, could also be Christian. They don't lead first with being religious, and especially when she was really most active. People sort of looked at you as if, you know. And she sort of took that and flipped it on its head and said, no, this can be an inspiration for very radical art.
And it seems like she did something similar with motherhood. She took something that was seen as antithetical to a working artist and declared it both to be art itself and a source of inspiration for her art.
So that was her bold stroke for sure, yeah.
Could you talk at all about the role of anger in her work or in her motivation? I noticed there were a few moments in the film where she talked about anger as a generative force for her.
Yeah, I think after she became a mother, people did not relate to her as an interesting person anymore, with anything interesting to say. And she had always sort of pictured herself as a member of the avant-garde. She was very much in the conversation, and suddenly she fell out of that conversation. And then, as she says in the film, you know, all her heroes, whether it was Rothko or Duchamp or Jackson Pollock, none of them changed diapers. So she had to figure out a way to stay relevant because she was also committed to being a good mother. And she loved her kids. And so I mean, again, that was the bold stroke where she said, aha, this can be art too.
Absolutely.
And in terms of the binary you spoke about before, I mean, she is very critical of Western civilization for valuing the thing created, the object, the consumer object, where she says there are processes that go on that are deep and rich that we ignore in our pursuit of just the material end product.
Could you talk a little bit about how she viewed her work as speaking to ideas about consumption? I mean, you just touched a little bit on that, and the earth and what she hoped to communicate?
I think she was saying, you know, we don't just, like we say, oh, I threw it away, I threw it out. Well, out and away are a place, and it's a finite resource, this place that we dump stuff, and that the earth needs the kind of care, just like any other system. She's very interested in systems, so she's interested in like the domestic, urban systems in particular. Material urban flow is like where she's at. And she says, okay, fine, you want to buy stuff, you want to, you know, have stuff, but you have to also be aware that when you get rid of it, somebody is dealing with that. Somebody's processing it. The earth has to deal with it. A human being has to deal with it. You can't just, you know, dump stuff. And I thought that was a vital message because, you know, we do live in a pretty hyper-consumerist society.
And we work really hard to make the consequences of that invisible.
Yeah, exactly.
And she really did amazing. I mean, I was so inspired by how much of her work was, as you said, making invisible visible, whether that was gender, whether that was labor, whether that was consumption, garbage, social hierarchies.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of social hierarchies, one of the things I love is that about her story is it started out as a sort of what we think of new left, you know, an identity politics story of a feminist in the 60s. And by the time she started working for the Sanitation Department, she realized that this was it became actually an old left story of labor. And she shifted from, I mean, she still was a feminist, but the issues she was dealing with most prominently with the sanitation workers, as the one African-American guy there says, it's an issue of class. It's not an issue. For him, it wasn't an issue of race. It was an issue of class. It doesn't mean that other sanitation forces didn't deal with that issue, but these guys saw themselves as vets, disabled vets, whatever vets, who wanted just a slice of the American dream, and they were just looked down upon. They were not given the respect that they deserved.
And I thought it was fascinating that on the one hand, she knew what it meant when they said they treat us like maids, as if
Sure.
it was natural that a
Sure.
maid should be treated poorly or a mother should be treated poorly. And she was sensitive to that. She
Sure.
identified that. And then she said, you know, this is proof that this isn't gendered.
Right.
And I thought that that was an amazing
Again,
contradiction
that's
to
a very
hold.
old left concept about it's the work
Right.
itself. So I kind of, and she was trying to she really wanted a revolution. I mean, to this day, she'll say that I wanted a revolution. So if the way towards the revolution was to build a bridge across the gender divide and work with an all-male sanitation force, she was fine with that. You know, that it was the work itself that she was looking to gain respect for. Yeah.
And my last question, or maybe just observation, was how one of her feminist acts, even while working in this virtually all-male environment, was that her work was deeply relational. It was based on community and interpersonal, direct, sometimes physical contact, and that is an act of maintenance, that is an act of care.
Yeah, I mean, a sort of leitmotif of the film is hands. I mean, she did a project with gloves, she shook hands. There were the gloves people wore during COVID, and it was very important to her that when she shook hands with the 8,500 workers, that she didn't wear gloves and that they didn't wear gloves, that there would be sort of skin-to-skin contact where she could look them in the eye and express her gratitude for the work they did. It seems like such a simple thing, but it was a kind of radical act of recognition. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It is a delight to talk to you. I could do so all day, but I would like to open it up to questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Thank you for the film, thank you for this beautiful discussion. You just talked upon certain elements of Judaism, particularly the social justice element and the values element, as motivating forces for this artist. But you grew up in an observant home. You have to be aware that so much of Judaism is also ritual practice, the elevation of daily things, the washing of the hands, the lighting of the candles, the sweeping away of crumbs before Passover. Could that have been a driving force for her trying to elevate these very mundane daily things to artistic status?
I don't know if it was a motivation, but I think she was comfortable with it because of that. I think you make an important point. There's a liturgical aspect to her work. The things she respects are things that we do every day, maybe at the same time every day. They're repetitive, they're ritualistic, and she was trying to sort of shine a spotlight on that. But I agree with you. I think she was very comfortable with celebrating the ritualistic, for sure.
Hi. It comes across that she's very selfless. She's honoring the sanitation workers, the snow plowers. She's elevating them. She doesn't get any money or very little money for what she does. How does she reconcile that? And I'd like to know how she felt about seeing the film.
How does she reconcile it with what? Not getting money? With
Well, yeah, she's elevating everyone else, and she's honoring everyone else, and she doesn't get any particular.
Well, she gets a real charge of realizing a work. I think if anyone here is an artist or knows artists, you know that they're passionate about their work, and that getting a project done is, it's not like they don't care about the money, they do, but I think one of her life frustrations is when she thinks about all the works that she really had planned out and thought through that never got realized because she had no money to do that. And you see that in her little exchange with Tom Finkelpearl, the Cultural Affairs Commissioner. So what she reconciles is the fact that she may not have made a lot of money, but she got to see work done that she created and that expressed her vision. And that's huge.
Yeah. How does she feel about seeing the film?
Oh, she loves the film. Yeah. I mean, we had our battles at the end, but now she loves it. Yeah. Oh, yes, Joseph.
Thanks so much for the film, and you brought so much in, the family, beautifully balanced, her family, all the co-workers, the people who are still alive, I guess, who are co-workers. And I wondered, did you interview anyone from her art generation? And what does her art generation, people who were doing much less, who were doing much more, let's say, aesthetic or more private, more esoteric forms of performance, what they thought of her back then and what they think of her now? That, in other words, what was the more edgy performance artists of the time, what do they think in retrospect of her who had this huge public effect? I wonder if you came across any of those.
I wanted to do that towards the end of the film, but I didn't have the money. That's the plain truth of it. But there were definitely some artist voices I would have loved to hear. I will say that she's been a real inspiration for a whole generation of younger artists, women, but not just women. Carmen Winant, who does, did the work at MoMA on giving birth and abortion. So I know she's been a major inspiration for younger artists, but I also think she was sort of, here, like you see she was with Hannah Wilke and Anna Mendieta, like they knew each other and they saw, Carolee Schneemann, they all saw each other's work, but she wasn't taking off her clothes. She was sort of, they were rightfully and heroically drawing attention to the exploitation of women's bodies and the violence against women's bodies. But she was saying there's another aspect to exploitation, and that's the work we do. We're not paid for it, it's not appreciated. So I know there was a dialogue between them, but she was recognized early on. I mean, Lucy Lepard was the first, curator who saw like, oh, there's something to this, and really got the ball rolling. Yeah.
Way in the back.
I don't know who's way back.
You
I was
and-
going to ask, when she went shaking hands as a tall blonde woman, I didn't hear anyone saying, "What the hell are you doing here, lady?" Did that happen much with those 8,500 workers?
From what I know, there were 3 guys who wouldn't shake hands with her. One said, did your husband give you permission to be here? Another one said, I don't believe in taxpayer money going to art. And she couldn't remember who the third one was, but apparently there was a third one who didn't shake hands with her. But they all did, and look, they kind of, there was some sexist stuff going on, but nobody harassed her, nobody abused her. I think she set a certain tone, and I think she was very respectful to them. And I also think they knew that she had, she was, had the protection of the higher ups. She was brought in by the sanitation commissioner, so it really didn't behoove them to mistreat her too much. All the way in the back, yes.
Thank you so much for this gorgeous film. I was just wondering, as you were working on this project, if there's anything you learned from Mierle that informs your process or changes your approach to your project.
Wow, that's a good question. I don't think I'm ever going to make another film again because I don't feel like fundraising for another 8 years. But so I definitely learned that this is not, it's not an easy process. But I think I'm a little bit impatient. I'm somebody who's like, and she taught me to kind of slow down and appreciate the process itself, I would say. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I want to pick up on your point about binaries, and I don't know if I can articulate what I want to say here, but there's something antithetical between sitting here, passively let's call it, and watching a film that tells us to go out and act differently with people. And I started to wonder if she really, she liked the film, I'm sure, because there was a little bit about her that was egotistical, which is fine. Maybe that's necessary for an artist. But she clearly was not passive in any
way. And for us to sit here and think about all the consumerism, for example, that's related to Hanukkah and to Christmas and the other holidays right now, and to go home and to wrap the presents and throw away the paper, after seeing this, seems to me to be a real conflict.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that, an irony of when I was making the film is that, you know, the film talks about performance work and its ephemeral nature. But they all were filming everything they did. So they actually created a material end product to their performance art. And so they, in some recess of their brain, they knew they wanted people to see what they were doing. And the act of seeing is not a passive act. It's an act of consciousness raising. So now your consciousness is raised about the packaging that the packages you'll be wrapping. And I think that is an aspect of documenting work and showing it.
I'm not conflicted about that. I don't use everything. But I'm conflicted about how we should see movies. Just to be clear.
You should only see movies if you want to see movies. That's my feeling, yeah.
Well, and I might say that it invites us to think about what we're doing, how we engage with it. We have the choice to sit here and think deeply about what we just saw, or we can just receive it and leave.
Okay, Steve. Steve,
one question. One more question.
Okay,
Quick
Steve.
question.
Just have a question about the term maintenance out. It could be garbage work or ship work. And I wonder if you had any time, why did she call it maintenance? It's a great name, but why did you?
That's what she calls herself. In her manifesto, she called herself a maintenance artist. And that is how she looks at all the work she does. She is a maintenance artist since she wrote that manifesto. So it seemed like a logical title for the film.
Yeah, great.
Thank you all so much for coming. And huge thank you again to Toby for making the film. I invite everyone to check out TWA.org. We have many resources there about Mierle and many other artists. And have a wonderful evening.